Hello, friends. I am Chevy. Welcome to my shed. How are you today? How's life in your world? How's things where you are? I hope it's fantastic. Everything here is great. I've for 2 days in a row, I've missed talking about this. Let's fix it. This is episode 2114, which means that, and it's Thursday, which means that on Tuesday was episode 2112, which is just a number to most people. It's a palindrome. But to some people, that number is especially significant. And that is because it is the title of an album by a Canadian rock band called Rush. Rush 2112 was one of my favorite albums of my youth. And it was one of my favorite albums for a very simple reason. All my friends were listening to Zeppelin, so I listened to something else, right? We've talked before about how I have felt like a parrot for most of my life. I've never really had my own thing. Obviously, that's false. There are things that I like because I like them, but especially musically, most of my musical interests until recently, until things like Spotify, YouTube Music, until I got was introduced to, most of my musical interests came to me from other people. And the reason that I liked Rush was because all my friends liked Led Zeppelin. And so I was, me being a contrarian, me being seeking something of my own, I took to Rush. That being said, they're a fantastic band, a fantastic group of people. And the 2112 album, one of my favorites. The song, the title track, is 23 minutes long. I don't know if it's somewhere around there. I remember there was a DJ played on a local station that I would call pretty often. We became kind of friendly. We talked about life and stuff, and I would request that song, and he would play it because he was like, I get to take a bathroom break and stuff. So, yeah. So the interesting thing about this is about both of those bands that I just mentioned, Rush and Led Zeppelin, were 70, they were before my time. But as with everything, the youth, while we had our own music, we were still looking back to things of our parents' past. And I find that reflected today. My oldest has some obsession with Sublime. How did you find out about Sublime? Why are you wearing Sublime merch? But I guess it was the same thing back then. My friends were all listening to Led Zeppelin, and now, if a child today is I'm listening to Led Zeppelin, that's oldies, right? That's my old, when I was growing up listening to the 50s and 60s, kind of early rock and roll, jazz, that sort of stuff, it was just kind of eh. But, for me, Zeppelin, Rush were 10 to 15, 20 years prior. And that's what my kids are listening to, music from the 90s. I'm hearing things it's interesting. It's interesting to me that as everything, it's always been a cycle. Skinny jeans were really hot. Now we're to cargo pants, and we'll be back. Skinny jeans will come back around. They always do. It's a cycle, and music is part of that cycle. And people will find and rediscover old music, and maybe it's for a sense of identity. Maybe it's the same reason that I latched on to Rush, because Rush was a band, the size of, maybe not the size of Led Zeppelin, but they were huge in their own right. And I latched on to them so that I could form my own identity, so I could say, this is my thing. I discovered this. Recently, I've come back around to a band called Morphine. Morphine, I've listened to Morphine not my whole life, because it didn't exist my whole life, but since the mid-90s, I've listened to Morphine, and I've absolutely loved their music. It was three guys. It was a lead singer with a very, very deep baritone voice, playing a two-string bass guitar with a slide, a baritone sax, and a drummer. And it's this weird lounge music. It's wild. I love it. But it was introduced to me. A friend introduced it to me. I don't know how he found it. And he called, at that time, he called it, what did he call it? He said this is acid jazz, is what he called it. And I kind of liked that idea. Today, I don't necessarily know that they're acid jazz or that that's a real thing. I think it is because I remember that he told me that years later, in the early 2000s-ish. I went looking for more, quote, acid jazz music, and I found things like the Sneaker Pimps. I found Tricky and Massive Attack, and I fell in love with that genre of music. I just forgot the other band that I recently saw. They're coming to Pittsburgh. What the heck is their name? That led me to Sneaker Pimps, Massive Attack, Tricky. I don't remember. Somebody else in that similar sort of vein. So, music discovery has, for most of my life, it's been either because somebody said, check this out. Like Dave Matthews was a check this out band. And I went, oh, I really like this. Their drummer, I was a drummer at the time. Dave Matthews started hitting, and Carter Beauford is just probably one of the best drummers I've ever heard in my life. It's phenomenal. And so I started trying to mimic him when I was playing drums. Pearl Jam, we've talked about before how they were, I had, somebody introduced me to their 10 album versus whatever. No Code though, somebody, years later, somebody said, you got to check this album out. And that was my real, like, oh, I love this. And I fell in love with Pearl Jam at that time. But Rush 2112, man, that was big. That was a big thing for me, was that album. The funny thing is, I don't even know right now if I could tell you, other than 2112, and I think Tom Sawyer was on that album, I can't tell you any other songs off that album. And I think I went from Rush to maybe Metallica. I was listening to a lot of Metallica around that time. Early, Ride the Lightning, Master of Puppets, that sort of stuff. Yeah. Weird time. But I can't believe I've completely missed talking about it on 2112. On episode 2112. Anyway, it just brought up a whole slew of memories about music and how my journeys through musical genres. Like these past probably 6 years, I've been on this punk journey that I should have been on in the 90s, but I kind of missed out on it. It was happening mostly on the West Coast, and then I was in the military when it was a whole thing. I missed the 70s, 80s punk. That didn't exist here. There wasn't a thing. Unless it was on MTV, it was not a thing. Nobody was playing punk here until the 90s when bigger bands like Pennywise and Social Distortion took off. Green Day, obviously. Some people say Offspring. And so I've just been kind of like, I've heard a lot of these songs, I've heard a lot of these groups, but in the past, but it was just kind of like in passing, and I didn't really sit down to listen and appreciate. I don't know, I don't know where in the next 40 years or 30 years I'm going to look back at this time and go, man, this album really changed everything for me. I don't know what it might be, but 2112 was one of those albums that really opened up my musical world. What about you? Do you have any like fond memories of specifically Rush or anything else from that era that opened up your musical world? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for being here as always. Thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing, being amazing friends and wonderful people. I really appreciate you. And I'll see you again tomorrow. Today's word you should know sounds smart is vivacious. It's an adjective meaning joyful, happy, spirited, possessing a positive attitude about an enthusiasm for life, a person who lives life to the fullest. Even after her family maintained some steep revenue losses, Sandra retained her vivacious character. Vivacious, V-I-V-A-C-I-O-U-S. That's a good word. I would like to be vivacious someday. I'm working towards it. I'm really working towards it.